Welcome, dear listener, back to the Horror Story channel.
I am your narrator, and tonight, we will journey together to a forgotten town, a place where silence is not peace, but a bottomless hunger. The horror story about to be told is titled,
Paris, the Echo. The one who eats the silence.
If this is your first time visiting the Horror Stories home, don't hesitate to take a second to hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue bringing you the most horrifying and haunting tales. Now, let's turn off the lights, pull up the covers, and listen. The sign for Havenwood, Oregon, was a casualty of time and weather.
The green paint was peeled back like sunburned skin, revealing the dark, rotting wood beneath.
A friendly place to call home, it claimed in letters that wept rust-colored tears. Liam Caldwell slowed his tired sedan, the engine groaning in protest as it rolled onto the town's main artery, a stretch of asphalt named, with a profound lack of imagination, Main Street. Friendly was not the word that came to mind. The air, thick with the scent of damp pine and wet earth, seemed to press in on the car. It was late afternoon in early autumn, and the sky was the color of a day-old bruise, a low-hanging canopy of bruised purples and grays that promised a cold, persistent rain. The buildings lining the street were specters of a more prosperous time. The grand old cinema, the Majestic, had its name spelled out in dead light bulbs. The windows of the Five and Dime were boarded over, faded posters for movies released a decade ago still clinging to the plywood. It was a town caught in a permanent state of twilight, both literally and figuratively. Liam was a professional collector of ghosts. Not the spectral, chain-rattling kind, but the ghosts of memory, the faint imprints left behind by people who had simply vanished. His podcast, Faded Footprints, had carved out a respectable niche in the crowded true crime market by focusing exclusively on rural cold cases, the kinds of stories that never made national headlines, the ones that festered in the quiet corners of the country. His listeners were drawn to his calm, methodical narration and his obsessive attention to detail. What they didn't know was that his obsession was born from a wound that never healed, a personal ghost he'd been chasing for 15 years, his younger sister, Chloe, who had walked out of their suburban home one summer evening and never returned. Every case he took was a penance, a search for answers for others that he could never find for himself. This trip was for the Miller family. In 1985, Raymond, Mary, and their two children, 8-year-old Sarah and 6-year-old Josh, had disappeared from their farmhouse on the edge of Havenwood. There were no signs of a struggle. The dinner table was set for 4. The family car was still in the garage. They had been swallowed whole by the Oregon woods, leaving behind nothing but a single chilling photograph found on a roll of undeveloped film in their camera. It was a picture of the forest behind their house, dark and menacing, and in the center, almost lost in the deep shadows between the ancient firs, was a tall, unnaturally thin figure. It was blurry, indistinct, but its presence in the frame was a scream of wrongness. That photo, and the utter mystery surrounding it, was the reason Liam was here. He found the Whispering Pines Motel, at the far end of Main Street. It was a single-story, L-shaped building that looked like it hadn't seen a new coat of paint since the Millers vanished. The neon sign fizzled, the O in motel, blinking erratically like a dying star. A stooped, skeletal man with a face like crumpled parchment slid a key across the counter without a word. The air in the lobby was stale, smelling of dust and disappointment. Room 7 was at the very end of the building, its door facing the dense, encroaching forest. Inside, the brown shag carpet seemed to absorb the light. A single lamp with a yellowed shade cast long, distorted shadows across the room. Liam dropped his duffel bag and his heavy case of recording equipment on the floor. He ran a hand over his face, the stubble scratching his palm. The long drive from Seattle had worn him down, but a familiar thrum of energy, the thrill of the hunt, was already starting to push back the fatigue. He set up his gear on the rickety desk, a high-fidelity condenser microphone, a digital audio recorder, and his laptop. He pulled up his files on the Miller case, digitized police reports, newspaper clippings, grainy photos of the family smiling in another lifetime. He stared at Raymond's broad, honest face, Mary's gentle eyes. He saw Chloe in the faces of their children. The familiar ache settled in his chest, a dull, constant pressure. This is for them, he told himself, the same mantra he used for every case. For them. After a quick, tasteless meal from a gas station down the road, he decided to take a drive out to the old Miller property. He wasn't planning on going in tonight. He just wanted to see it, to get a sense of the place that had birthed the mystery. The directions he had were from an old police file, landmarks described that might not even exist anymore.
Turn left at the orange tree, one instruction read.
Liam shuddered, hoping it was just a name. The paved road gave way to gravel, and the gravel soon dwindled to a dirt track that was being slowly reclaimed by the wilderness. The forest closed in around the car, the towering pines forming a dense black wall on either side. His headlights cut a weak tunnel through the oppressive darkness.
The air grew colder.
He checked his phone. No signal. Of course. He found it, just as the report described. A collapsing wooden fence, a rusted mailbox half swallowed by ivy. The house itself was a dark silhouette against the bruised sky, a jagged wound in the landscape. It was a two-story farmhouse, but its windows were black, empty eyes, and a portion of the roof had caved in, giving it the look of a skull with a section bashed in.
The silence here was different from the silence in town.
It was a heavy, listening silence. Liam felt a primal prickling on his skin, the instinct of a prey animal that knows it's being watched. He killed the engine and the headlights, plunging himself into absolute darkness. He sat for a long moment, letting his eyes adjust.
The shape of the house slowly resolved itself from the gloom.
He rolled down the window. The smell of decay was stronger here, rot and damp and something else, something vaguely metallic and sweet, like old blood. He grabbed his audio recorder and a parabolic microphone from the passenger seat. He wouldn't get out of the car, not tonight, but maybe he could capture some ambient sound. The sounds of a place held their own stories. He pointed the microphone toward the house, slipped on his headphones, and hit record. For the first few minutes, there was nothing but the gentle sigh of the wind through the pines and the frantic, lonely chirping of a single cricket. He adjusted the gain, amplifying the quiet. Then he heard it. It was faint, almost at the edge of his hearing.
A whisper.
It was too low to be the wind, too rhythmic to be an animal. It sounded like a voice, but the words were unintelligible, a sibilant liquid hiss that seemed to slither directly into his ears.
Give, USSS. Liam's blood ran cold.
He ripped the headphones off, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound vanished, replaced once more by the wind. He was a rational man. He believed in faulty equipment, radio interference, auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns in random noise. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the sound hadn't come through the microphone. He felt it had been whispered directly into his skull. He fumbled for the ignition, his hands slick with a sudden sweat. The engine turned over with a reassuring roar, and the headlights blazed to life, flooding the overgrown yard with light. For a split second, in the blinding glare, he thought he saw something move in the black rectangle of the doorway.
A flicker of motion. Tolentin.
He slammed the car into reverse, gravel spitting from under the tires, and sped back down the dirt track, not daring to look in the rearview mirror until he was back on the paved road. His breath came in ragged gasps. It was just nerves, he told himself. The isolation, the creepy old house, the power of suggestion from that damned photograph. But as he drove back toward the feeble lights of the Whispering Pines Motel, he couldn't escape the chilling certainty that the listening silence of that place had just spoken back to him. And he knew, with a dread that settled deep in his bones, that he had just recorded the first line of Havenwood's ghost story. The next morning, Liam forced himself into a routine of professionalism, a deliberate shield against the creeping fear from the night before. He re-listened to the audio file. The whisper was still there, a faint, unsettling stain on the recording, but in the harsh light of day, it was easier to dismiss. He labeled the file EVP-01. Electronic voice phenomenon, with a question mark for his own skepticism, and set out to the Havenwood County Sheriff's Department. The department was a small brick building attached to the town hall, a single cruiser parked out front. The man behind the desk was built like a refrigerator, with a thick neck and a face that looked permanently set in a scowl. His name tag read Sheriff Brody. He looked Liam up and down, his gaze lingering on Liam's city clothes and professional demeanor with open suspicion. "Podcaster, huh?" Brody said, his voice a low rumble. He leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight. "Come here to stir up ghosts and sell ads." "I'm here to look into the Miller family disappearance," Liam said, keeping his tone even.
"It's a cold case, Sheriff."
I thought a fresh perspective might help. I was hoping to see the original case files. Brody grunted. "Files are archived. And closed. We don't have the manpower to go digging up 30-year-old paperwork for every ghoul chaser with a microphone." "It's a matter of public record," Liam countered politely.
Under the Freedom of Information Act.
"This is Havenwood, Mr. Caldwell, not Portland," Brody cut him off, his eyes narrowing. "We have our own way of doing things. Some stories are best left buried."
For everyone is saké.
The threat was unspoken but clear.
Leave it alone.
Liam knew when he was beaten. He thanked the sheriff for his time and left, the man's hostile gaze boring into his back. The encounter was unsettling, but not entirely unexpected. Small-town law enforcement was often territorial, wary of outsiders dredging up old traumas. Yet Brody's hostility felt deeper, more personal. It felt like fear. His next stop was the town library, a quaint stone building with a bell in a small steeple. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The librarian was a woman who seemed as ancient as the books she curated. Her name was Evelyn Reed. She was bird-like, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind thick spectacles and a cloud of white hair pinned into a bun. When Liam mentioned the Miller case, her friendly demeanor flickered. A shadow passed over her face. "The Millers," she said softly, her voice raspy.
A terrible tragédie.
"A great stain on this town." "The sheriff wasn't very helpful," Liam explained. "He seems to think the past should stay in the past."
Evelyn gave the DRY humorless chuckle.
Sheriff Brody's family has been in Havenwood since the founding. They believe the best way to deal with a wound is to pretend it isn't there, even as it rots from the inside out.
The past, Monsieur Caldwell, in Havenwood, the past isn't even past.
It's just waiting. Her words sent a chill down Liam's spine. He felt an instant connection with this woman, a sense that she was the keeper of the town's real stories, the ones not found in official records. He told her about his podcast, his methodology, his focus on giving a voice to the forgotten. She listened intently, her sharp eyes studying his face. Finally, she nodded slowly. Perhaps a voice is what's needed. The silence in this town has gone on for too long.
It's a hungry silence.
She stood and beckoned for him to follow her. The official files won't tell you anything, but the town keeps its own records. She led him to a back room, a small dusty archive filled with cardboard boxes and bound volumes of the old local newspaper, the Havenwood Chronicle. "The paper went out of business 15 years ago," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the cramped space. "But I kept everything. Start here. Look at the articles from the fall of 1985. But then, look further back. Look for the patterns." Liam spent the rest of the day hunched over a large table, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from a high window. He read the initial reports on the Miller disappearance. They were sparse, filled with bewildered quotes from neighbors and a frustrated Sheriff Brody, who was just a young deputy back then. But as he followed Evelyn's advice and started digging deeper into the archives, a disturbing picture began to emerge. In 1974, 11 years before the Millers, a lone hiker had vanished without a trace in the woods near Havenwood. In 1963, 11 years before that, a family of 4 staying at a remote cabin were reported missing, Their cabin was found in a state identical to the Miller's house. 1952. Two young lovers disappeared from their car on a secluded lane.
1941, à Loguet. 1930, à Prospector.
The pattern was terrifyingly precise. Every 11 years, people vanished. The circumstances were always the same. No struggle, no motive, no bodies.
Juste à clean, complète érasure.
The town, in its official capacity, seemed to treat each event as an isolated tragedy. But reading the accounts one after another, Liam felt a cold dread crystallize in his gut. This wasn't a series of unfortunate events. This was a cycle.
Harvest.
He stayed until Evelyn gently told him the library was closing. As he packed up his notes, his mind reeling, she placed a thin, leather-bound book on the table in front of him. It was a handwritten journal. "This was my great-grandfather's," she said quietly. He was the town minister in the early 1900s. He saw things. He wrote them down.
Be careful, monsieur. Caldwell. What you're looking for isn't a human monster.
It's something much, much older. Back in the stale air of room 7, Liam felt a sense of vertiginous unease, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. The Miller case wasn't just a cold case. It was a single chapter in a long, horrifying book. He opened the journal. The handwriting was spidery. The ink faded. The first entry he read made the hair on his arms stand on end. October 12, 1908.
Another one taken. The boy from the logging camp.
The tithe has been paid. The woods are quiet again for a time. The congregation prays to God in my church, but they leave offerings of dead crows and twisted roots at the base of the old birch on the edge of town. They fear God, but they respect the hunger of this land. They call it the whisperer in the trees. They say it has been here forever. I fear they are right. A tithe.
A sacrifice. The whisperer in the trees.
Liam's throat was dry. He thought of the sibilant hiss on his recording.
Give, USSS.
A sharp rapping on his motel room door made him jump, nearly dropping the journal. He froze, his heart pounding. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the sound of knuckles on wood. It was a dry, scratching, clicking sound.
Like branch scraping against the door.
He held his breath, listening.
Silence.
Then the scratching came again, harder this time, more insistent. Scrape. Scrape. Click. It was coming from the bottom of the door, as if a dog was trying to get in. But it wasn't a dog. Slowly, silently, he crept toward the door and knelt down, his eye to the peephole. The distorted, fish-eye view showed him nothing but the empty motel walkway and the dark wall of the forest beyond. He stayed there for a full minute, his body rigid. The scratching had stopped. He convinced himself it was his imagination, his nerves frayed by the journal and the day's discoveries. He stood up, his knees cracking, and turned back toward the desk. That's when he saw it. Slipped under the door, lying on the grimy shag carpet, was a single perfect, crimson autumn leaf. It was a type of maple leaf he hadn't seen anywhere else in the pine-dominated woods around Havenwood. It hadn't been there a few minutes ago. He stared at it, a cold, paralyzing fear seizing him. He knew with an instinct that defied all logic, that the leaf was a message. A token.
En acknowledgement.
The listening silence had found him. It knew he was here. And it was waiting for him in the woods. He had come to Havenwood to find a ghost story, and now he was standing in the middle of it. The faint, sweet, metallic scent of the woods by the Miller house seemed to cling to the air in the room, and Liam suddenly felt like he was suffocating. Liam didn't sleep. He sat in the single armchair, the minister's journal in his lap, the lamp on the desk casting his stretched, distorted shadow against the wall. Every creak of the old motel, every sigh of the wind outside, was magnified into a threat. The red leaf sat on the desk, a vibrant splash of color in the drab room, a silent, menacing promise. He kept his audio recorder running all night, hoping to catch another whisper, but the only sound it captured was the frantic, unsteady beat of his own heart. Morning came not as a relief, but as a gray, washed-out continuation of the night. A thin, miserable drizzle was falling, painting the world in shades of charcoal. Liam felt hollowed out, exhausted but wired, his thoughts racing. The rational part of his brain was screaming at him to pack his bags, leave Havenwood, and never look back. He could create the podcast from his notes, from a safe distance. But the other part of him, the part that was still that teenage boy searching for his sister, couldn't let it go. The Millers, the hiker, the lovers, they were all Chloe now. He couldn't leave them. He needed help. Not from the police, but from someone who wouldn't dismiss the minister's journal as the ravings of a madman. The name came to him from a half-forgotten corner of his research.
Dr. Alistair Finch.
Finch was a disgraced academic, a former professor of anthropology and folklore at the University of Oregon, kicked out for what the board called unethical research methods and a morbid obsession with fringe belief systems. He had written several obscure but brilliant books on pre-colonial mythology and folk magic in the Pacific Northwest. His central thesis was that many local legends weren't just stories, but cultural memories of real entities and the rituals used to placate them. Finch was living somewhere in self-imposed exile in Portland, a pariah to the academic community. He was also, Liam suspected, the only person on Earth who might believe him. Finding a number for him was difficult, but Liam's investigative skills were sharp. He tracked down a contact through a forum for rare book collectors. When he finally got Finch on the line, the man's voice was exactly as he'd imagined, gravelly, impatient, and soaked in whiskey. "Who is this?" Finch barked into the phone. Liam quickly explained who he was and why he was calling, summarizing the pattern of disappearances, the minister's journal, the thing he'd heard on the recording. He expected to be dismissed as a crank. Instead, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Havenwood," Finch finally said, the name spoken like an incantation.
The town the maps forgo.
"I know the stories.
The weeping teeth.
The hunger that walks." Liam felt a jolt of validation that was immediately replaced by a fresh wave of fear. "You know about this."
He knows the legends. Caldwell.
"Most are just campfire tales. But some places have teeth. The soil remembers the blood it was fed." There was a sound of clinking ice, then a long swallow. "This whisperer, this entity, you've drawn its attention."
Living a token, like that leaf?
"That's not a threat. It's an invitation. It's curious. It wants to see what you're made of."
What do he do?
Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper.
You're the one who knocked on the devil's door, son.
Now you have two choices, run like hell and hope it doesn't follow, or you see what's inside. If you're serious, send me the audio file and a scan of that journal. I'll take a look.
But a warning, Monsieur Caldwell. When you stare into an abyss like Havenwood, the abyss stare back.
And this one has been staring for a very long time. The line went dead. Liam spent the next hour at the library, using their scanner with Evelyn Reed's quiet permission. She could see the toll the night had taken on him. Her gaze was filled with a mixture of pity and grim understanding. "He's woken up, hasn't he?" she asked softly, placing a cup of hot tea in his trembling hands. "He knows you're digging. He gets playful before the cycle ends." "The cycle," Liam repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Evelyn, what happens at the end of the cycle?" Her face, a roadmap of wrinkles, seemed to collapse inward. "The tithe is paid," she whispered. "Havenwood gives the forest one of its own, or more than one. And in return, we get another 11 years of quiet."
You know this? The town knows.
Not knows. Not like you and I. They feel it. It's in the bones of this place.
Why do you think no one ever lived Havenwood?
Why do you think no one new ever stays? They are all, in their own way, keepers of the cage. Sheriff Brody most of all. His family made the first pact a long time ago. The implication was monstrous. The whole town was a cult, a prison, and its residents were both the inmates and the wardens. He emailed the files to Finch and returned to his motel, the drizzle outside turning into a steady percussive rain. He felt trapped, a fly caught in a web woven from history and fear. That afternoon, he went back to the Miller house. He had to. It was the epicenter, the place where the veil was thinnest. This time, he went prepared. He wore heavy boots and a waterproof jacket, and in his backpack, he carried a powerful flashlight, his recording gear, and a heavy iron tire iron from the trunk of his car. The weight of it was a small, cold comfort. The house looked even more desolate in the rain. The path to the front door was a soup of mud and slick, decaying leaves. The door itself hung crookedly on one hinge. Liam pushed it open, and the screech of rusted metal echoed in the dead air within. The inside of the house was a shrine to a moment frozen in time. A thick layer of dust and grime covered everything, but underneath it, the scene was just as the police had described it in 1985. The dinner plates were on the table, coated in a gray film. A child's drawing was pinned to the refrigerator with a cartoon magnet. A thin layer of water covered the floor, dripping steadily from the hole in the roof, each drop landing with a sound like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds of his intrusion. He moved through the house with his recorder running, his voice a low murmur as he documented what he saw. He narrated the scene, the details, the oppressive feeling of abandonment. It was methodical, the work of his podcast, a way to keep the encroaching dread at bay. He went upstairs. The floorboards groaned under his weight. The parents' bedroom was neat, the bed made. The children's room was a riot of faded color. Toys lay scattered on the floor, their plastic eyes staring up at him blankly. On the wall above the small bed in Josh's room, a series of crude crayon drawings were tacked up. They showed a smiling stick figure family under a bright yellow sun. But the last drawing was different. The colors were dark, angry slashes of black and red. It depicted the forest, the trees drawn like tall, grasping claws. And in the middle of the trees stood a tall, impossibly thin figure with long, spindly arms. It had no face, just a blank space where features should be. Little stick figure Josh was holding its hand. Underneath, a single word was scrawled in a child's messy handwriting, friend. A floorboard creaked behind him. Liam spun around, the tire iron held up, his heart leaping into his throat. The hallway was empty. He was alone. But he wasn't. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, a physical pressure on his skin. The air grew heavy, cold, and carried that same sweet, rotten smell. He backed out of the room, his eyes scanning the shadows. He descended the stairs, his boots splashing in the shallow water. As he reached the bottom step, he heard it again. A whisper, but not through his headphones this time. It was in the room with him, seeming to come from all directions at once. So, hungry. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, landing on the far wall of the living room. He saw something that hadn't been there before. Scratched into the peeling, water-stained wallpaper were dozens of symbols, a chaotic jumble of spirals and sharp, angular lines. And in the center, a fresh mark. A perfect, crimson maple leaf, identical to the one left at his door, but this one wasn't real. It was drawn in something wet and dark that was still dripping slowly down the wall. Blood. He backed toward the door, his mind screaming. This wasn't a haunting. This was a claiming. The house was a stomach, and it was beginning to digest. He stumbled out of the doorway, back into the cleansing rain, gasping for air. As he turned to run to his car, his foot caught on something in the mud. He fell hard, his hands sinking into the cold, wet earth. He pushed himself up, his palms covered in mud, and looked down to see what he'd tripped over. Sticking out of the ground was a small white object. He wiped the mud away. It was a child's sneaker. Old, rotted, but unmistakable. And from the size of it, he knew with a sickening certainty that it had belonged to 6-year-old Josh Miller. He had found the first body. But it wasn't a grave. The earth around the sneaker was soft, recently disturbed. It was as if the ground itself had just coughed it up. An offering. A breadcrumb on a trail leading into the darkest part of the woods. The whisperer wasn't just inviting him. It was daring him. And Liam knew, as he stared at that pathetic, lonely shoe, that he was going to be foolish enough to accept. Liam drove back to town in a fugue state, the child's sneaker wrapped in a plastic bag on the passenger seat. It felt like a bomb. It was tangible proof, something he could take to Sheriff Brody, something that would force him to reopen the case. But as he pulled onto Main Street, he knew it wasn't that simple. Brody didn't want the case reopened. He wanted it buried. Showing him the shoe wouldn't bring the law down on the mystery. It would bring the law down on him. He went to the only person he could trust. He found Evelyn at the library, shelving books with a quiet, methodical rhythm. He unwrapped the sneaker on her desk. She looked at it, and all the color drained from her face. She sat down heavily in her chair. "He's getting impatient," she whispered, her hands trembling. "The cycle is accelerating. Your presence here, it's like throwing a stone into a stagnant pond. The ripples are waking things up." "What do we do?" Liam asked, his own voice unsteady. "There's only one thing we can do," she said, her eyes finding his. "We have to understand what it is we're fighting. We have to find its heart, its anchor." She pulled a large hand-drawn map of Havenwood County from a drawer. It was old, the paper yellowed and brittle. Legends say the first settlers made their pact at a specific place. A place of power. They called it the birthing tree, or sometimes the hanging tree. It's a great, ancient birch tree, far older than the rest of the forest, deep in the woods. That's where the minister wrote about the offerings being left. It's the entity's nexus. Its throne room. As she spoke, Liam's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an email from Alistair Finch. The subject line was a single word, urgent. He opened it. The body of the email was short and terrifying. Caldwell. The symbols you sent from the Miller house are a form of pictographic sigil writing. Not Native American. Something older, much more primitive. They don't just tell a story, they are an engine. A ritual machine designed to focus belief and channel energy. The recurring spiral is a symbol for a cycle, or a drain. The angular marks represent sacrifice. It's a complex liturgical calendar marking the tithes. The whispers on your audio file are fascinating. I ran them through a spectral analysis. It's not a human voice. The frequency is too low, infrasonic in parts. It's the kind of sound that can cause feelings of dread, paranoia, even hallucinations. It's not speaking to your ears, it's vibrating the bones in your skull. But the journal is the real prize. The minister refers to the entity as the Whisperer, but he also uses another name, one he seems to have learned from the town's elders, Tsilanuni, which roughly translates from a bastardized local dialect to the one who eats the silence. It doesn't just feed on people, Caldwell. It feeds on their absence.
On the qui est left behind.
Your podcast, your entire life's work of documenting the vanished. You're a walking buffet for this thing. It's not just curious about you. It's delighted.
Get out of there. You are ringing the dîner bell. AF.
Liam read the email twice, his blood turning to ice.
The one who eats the silence.
He looked at Evelyn, the map spread between them. The birthing tree.
The nexus.
He knew what he had to do. Running wasn't an option anymore. He was too deep. The entity had his scent. He had to go on the offensive. He had to go to its church. "Show me where it is," he said to Evelyn, his voice filled with a resolve that he didn't feel. She pointed a trembling finger to a spot deep within a large, unlabeled swath of green on the map.
The woods are dangereux, Liam.
They don't obey the normal rules of geography.
Pas disappear.
The sun doesn't shine in some parts. People get lost in there and are never seen again, even when it isn't the 11th year. I have to see it, he insisted. I have to document it. It's the only way. He spent the rest of the day preparing, assembling a kit for a long hike into hostile territory, GPS device, though he suspected it would be useless, compass, headlamps, extra batteries, food, water, and his recording equipment, sealed in waterproof bags. He also took the heavy iron tire iron. It felt laughably inadequate. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, he drove to the edge of the woods, parking his car on a secluded logging trail. The rain had stopped, but the air was cold and heavy, dripping from the canopy above. The forest was an impenetrable wall of black. He switched on his headlamp, the beam cutting a nervous, bouncing path into the darkness. He stepped out of the car and was immediately swallowed by the immensity of the woods.
The sounds of the road, of civilization, vanished.
He was in another world, a kingdom of ancient trees and deep, suffocating silence. He followed the compass bearing Evelyn had given him, pushing his way through thick undergrowth and over slick, moss-covered logs. An hour passed. Then 2. The forest was a disorienting, monotonous labyrinth. Every direction looked the same. The silence was absolute, broken only by his own harsh breathing and the snap of twigs under his boots. It was a silence that felt heavy, watchful. He remembered Finch's words. It was a silence that was being eaten. He started talking to his recorder, narrating his journey, his thoughts, his growing sense of dread. It was a habit from his podcast, but here it felt like a desperate act of self-preservation, a way to prove he still existed, to push back against the oppressive quiet. It's incredible, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The trees here are impossibly tall. The canopy is so thick, I can't see the sky. I feel
like I'm walking on the bottom of a deep, green ocean.
He checked his GPS. The screen was frozen, the satellite icon blinking uselessly. The compass, however, was still pointing true. He trusted the old ways and pressed on. He began to notice strange things. Trees with trunks that twisted into unnatural, spiral patterns. Patches of ground where no plants grew, the soil black and barren. And then he saw the offerings. Hanging from the low-hanging branches of a gnarled oak were small macabre totems. Bundles of sticks tied with human hair. The skulls of small animals, their eye sockets filled with dried mud. A child's doll, its face smeared with what looked like blood. It was a gallery of folk horror, a series of warnings to turn back. But he couldn't. He was being pulled forward now, by a force he couldn't name. He could almost feel it, a low hum in the air, a vibration in the soles of his feet. He was getting close. He broke through a thicket of ferns and stopped dead. He was standing at the edge of a large, circular clearing. And in the center of the clearing stood the tree. It was colossal, a monster of the natural world. Its trunk was a pale bone-white, and impossibly wide, easily 30 feet in diameter. Its bark was scarred with what looked like faces, twisted in silent screams. Its branches, bare of leaves despite the season, reached up toward the unseen sky like the skeletal fingers of a buried god. The ground around its base was a carpet of crimson maple leaves, despite there being no other maple trees in sight. This was the place from the minister's journal. This was the birthing tree. The air here was freezing cold and smelled of ozone and damp soil. Liam raised his audio recorder, his hands shaking so much he could barely hold it steady. He aimed the microphone at the tree and listened through his headphones. At first, there was nothing. A silence even deeper and more profound than before. Then, a low rumble started, a sound that seemed to come from the ground itself. It grew louder, resolving into a chorus of whispers. Hundreds of them. Thousands.
The voices of the lost. The voices of the dead.
They swirled around him, a hurricane of spectral sound, whispering of hunger, of cold, of being forgotten.
And then, one voice cut through the cacophony.
It was clear and close, a child's voice, whispering directly into his ear.
Liam?
His blood froze. He knew that voice. He had last heard it 15 years ago. "Chloe?" He breathed, his voice catching in a sob. The whispers intensified, the name Chloe echoing around him, a mocking, joyful chorus. And from the base of the giant tree, a shadow detached itself. It unfolded, rising, stretching, impossibly tall, impossibly thin. A figure of pure darkness, its limbs like the branches of a dead tree. It had no face, but Liam felt its gaze on him, a gaze of infinite hunger and ancient malevolent intelligence. His headlamp flickered and died. The swirling whispers reached a fever pitch. The figure took a gliding, silent step toward him. Liam was paralyzed by a terror so absolute it was transcendent. He had come here seeking the ghost of the Miller family, but he had found his own. The one who eats the silence had looked into his soul and found the quietest, most painful place. It had found Chloe. And now it was wearing her voice like a mask. The last thing he saw before he turned and ran blindly into the all-consuming darkness was the glint of the crimson leaves, spreading like a pool of fresh blood at the base of the great white tree. And so, the story of the one who eats the silence has come to its conclusion. A sad, yet beautiful and complete ending. Wouldn't you agree, listeners? Thank you to all the listeners who have journeyed with the Horror Stories channel to this very moment. What do you think about Evelyn's sacrifice and Liam's ending? Let us know your thoughts by leaving a comment below. Don't forget to hit like if you enjoyed this story, and subscribe to the channel to keep following other thrilling and terrifying tales. Once again, thank you sincerely, and see you again in the next stories. We wish you a peaceful night, if you can manage it. And so the story of part 1, The Echoes, the one who eats the silence, has come to its conclusion. A sad, yet beautiful and complete ending. Wouldn't you agree, listeners? Thank you to all the listeners who have journeyed with the Horror Stories channel to this very moment. What do you think about Evelyn's sacrifice and Liam's ending? Let us know your thoughts by leaving a comment below. Don't forget to hit like if you enjoyed this story, and subscribe to the channel to keep following other thrilling and terrifying tales. Once again, thank you sincerely, and see you again in the next stories. We wish you a peaceful night, if you can manage it.